Hey there guys, alright, today we are back with some more overly sarcastic productions. This time we are returning to the Trope Talk series. This time we're on to Mary Sue, and as the title says, yes, I am a writer. Not an author yet because the book has not been published. We're working on trying to get to that whole ordeal. It is a pain in the ass though. It's very exhausting. Before we dive in, make sure you go and check out the links in the description box below. I would love it if you joined the Discord and followed me over at Twitch. Now, Mary Sue, essentially, off the top of my head, what I know of Mary Sue is a character that essentially is super overpowered, really doesn't go through any struggles, always ends up on top, never loses, that kind of thing. I personally do not really care for the term. I do believe it has become extremely, exceptionally overused within the last few years. Especially within Star Wars itself has been used a lot when in regards to speaking about Rey. However, really, almost every, personally I think like every main character in the Star Wars universe is a Mary Sue or a Gary Sue, whichever you want to call it. So, you know, Luke is one. He doesn't really lose. He always comes out on top. You know, he suffers maybe I'd say roughly the same amount as Rey does, even though I think Rey should have lost a limb. It's Star Wars tradition for, if you're gonna call yourself a Skywalker at the end, then you better lose a fucking limb. Come on. But yeah. Anakin, I wouldn't say was one, mainly because he did suffer a lot. So yeah. Won't call him one, but Luke and Rey, I think the arguments could be made there for those two. Like, I think if you're gonna call Rey one, then you're gonna have to call Luke one, and vice versa. But anyways, what other? Can I think of any other Mary or Gary Sues off the top of my head? I really can't. I don't know any. Don't really. Yeah. And well, let's go ahead and hear what Red has to say. Whoa! Fuck, that was loud.
Alright, what the is a Mary Sue? Seriously, the term gets thrown around all over the goddamn place, but what does it mean?
Yes! This is what I'm saying, Red.
Nobody can agree. Some people say a Mary Sue is any character who's unrealistically heroic and or powerful, but that definition also covers basically every hero.
Yep.
So clearly it's too broad. Sometimes it's restricted to author inserts, but there's nothing stopping a writer from writing a perfectly harmless author avatar into the story. Iconic hero Luke Skywalker has been explicitly confirmed to be heavily based on George Lucas himself, if this didn't already give it away.
Really? I realized that my character is really George Lucas while we were filming in Tunisia. When I played the scene, I did it just like I thought George would react. When I did it like that, George called cut. Perfect. Oh. So George thinks of himself as super whiny? George thinks himself as a super whiny person? Because Luke, in the original movie, in A New Hope, is super, super whiny. But that's part of what makes him endearing, too.
Hamill has even gone on record to say that when he was stumped on how to play a scene, he'd just default to whatever Lucas would do, and Lucas would love it. But obviously, I mean, Luke is kind of a whiny twerp, it runs in the Skywalker family, but he doesn't feel like a Mary Sue. I mean, to me, I also liked Rey, so maybe my judgment on Star Wars protagonists shouldn't be treated as unbiased, but
I liked Rey in The Force Awakens. I actually largely liked the characterization of all of the characters presented in Force Awakens. However, I'm someone that, like, if you want me to enjoy the journey, then you're gonna have to stick the landing. And because they did not stick the landing with Rise of Skywalker, I can no longer enjoy The Force Awakens. That's just how I am, right? Like, I cannot go back and watch the first 4 seasons of Game of Thrones anymore. No, even though they are, especially season 3 is some of the greatest television ever. But because of season 8, I can't bring myself to go and watch that because the journey was ruined. There was an unsatisfying ending for me. In Star Wars, it's a little different. I wouldn't say Rise of Skywalker left as bad, nowhere near as bad of a taste as the Game of Thrones ending, but the characterizations that were set up in Force Awakens fell flat on their face, I felt like, by Rise of Skywalker. And I think it's not largely due to Rey. Like, Rey, I think, is the character I have the least problems with what they did. She kind of stayed the same. Most of her character development felt like it was in Force Awakens. Last Jedi and Rise of Skywalker, I didn't feel like she changed all that much. Uh, my issue with the sequels is Kylo Ren, actually, even though that I find him to be extremely toxic, especially with his relationship with Rey. I do not like it at all. It gives me just major red flags. Would have been if they had lived, if Kylo had both lived, I feel like it would have been an exceptionally toxic relationship. And it being otherwise would not make sense. They not good together. He tortured her in The Force Awakens. He killed her. He killed his own father and her adoptive father in The Force Awakens. Was the reason why Luke Skywalker died in Episode 8. So it's just like the redemption of Kylo Ren just does not work for me. I don't know why it feels, but Vader's redemption still works. Kylo's redemption doesn't work for me because it seems like it felt like to me that they were trying to make Kylo be truly redeemed, where like they were trying to be like, oh, forget all the trouble he did. That's what it felt like to me, that they were just kind of like gonna gloss over the fact that he slaughtered all of Luke's students, people who would have been his friends, right? It felt like they were glossing over that. Whereas with Vader's redemption, it didn't feel like there was an attempt at forgiving Vader's actions. It doesn't feel like there was an attempt at forgiving Anakin for what he did. Whereas for Kylo, there was just a vibe that I got where they were trying to really make him be trying to make him a sympathetic character, and I just could not sympathize with. Now, if they had what they could have done in Rise of Skywalker to completely fix this issue of mine, I'm going on a Star Wars tangent, and I don't care. What they could have done to fix that issue for me is have a flashback in Rise of Skywalker where it shows Han Solo igniting the lightsaber in Force Awakens and not Kylo. Because that was one of the biggest theories when The Force Awakens released, in between Force Awakens and The Last Jedi, was whether or not Kylo Ren had actually ignited that lightsaber and killed Han. There were people, I was one of the people thinking that Han, because you see Han actually like touching the lightsaber with Kylo. And Han, part of me wants to still believe also that Han ignited it himself, and in a way that still leaves the door to the light side still open to Kylo. But because they did not show that to us, there is nothing to insinuate, nothing to show us that Kylo truly was still on the light side. For The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi, going off of what was shown in the movies, he just seemed pure dark side. And then Rise of Skywalker felt like a quick 180. Whereas, and like, I feel like I am being hypocritical here, because like Vader is kind of the same, but I don't know, it just, there's something about it that came across differently with Kylo for me, and I don't know, I really can't place my finger on it. I can't figure it out. What strikes Kylo different for me and makes him not work as a character, even though he is essentially Vader 2.0. And that might actually be the problem there, is that he's just Vader 2.0, and I don't want a repeat character. I want new characters. I don't want the characters to be going through the same arcs as previous ones. I want them to be experiencing something different. They can have similar traits, but I don't want their arcs to literally be the exact fucking same, you know? Anyways.
Still, it seems like any established definition ropes in too many characters that we don't want it to apply to. So how do we unravel the mystery of the Mary Sue? Who is she? Well, we should probably start at the beginning. Let's indulge in a little bit of fandom archaeology and travel all the way back to 1973. Mary Sue was coined as a parody/dissection of this trope in its original form. She was a comically over-the-top self-insert character in a Star Trek fanzine, and I'd summarize, but it'd be easier to just read the first paragraph. Gee golly gosh glorioski, thought Mary Sue as she stepped on the bridge of the Enterprise. Here I am, the youngest
Wait, is this really a thing?
lieutenant in the fleet, only 15 and a half years old. Captain Kirk came up to her. Oh, Lieutenant, I love you madly. Will you come to bed with me? Captain, I am not that kind of girl. You're right, and I respect you for it. Here, take over the ship for a minute while I go get some coffee for us. Mr. Spock came onto the bridge. What are you doing in the command seat, Lieutenant? The captain told me to. Flawlessly logical. I admire your mind. See, at the time, this was a lot of what fanfiction was. People wanted to ride along with all these wacky adventures, which, fair, so they drop a character into the world and wish fulfill the hell out of it. Our buddy Mary Sue is gorgeous, talented, and desired, and
I feel like, isn't that a thing still with a bunch of fanfiction? Isn't that? I thought that was just what fanfiction kind of was. But also, when you start writing a story yourself, you're essentially writing fanfiction. Because you're borrowing from the stories that you grew up with, that you love the most, and you're putting your own characters in there. You're making up stuff on your own. So, kind of in a way, Lord of the Rings is a fanfiction of Tolkien's favorite stories, with his own twists and ideas.
and are respected by everybody. She's better than everyone at what they do, but nobody's mad about it because she's just so amazing. But none of that is why we dislike her. No, we find her annoying because the story is empty. This version of Mary Sue takes the spotlight and prima donnas her way through an otherwise fascinating fictional universe. This is just pure wish fulfillment. She's a backstory-less bundle of positive character traits with nothing behind the eyes, and the story's no fun unless you like pretending to be her, because the story is entirely centered on people reaffirming how great she is. Now this was the Gen 1 Mary Sue, the original shameless girls just want to have fun fic insert, and honestly, I'm not gonna complain about her. She's a fanfic character. People write fanfic for fun, and if your first original character happens to be you with better hair, then whatever, man, you do you. But Gen 1 Mary Sue
No, I 100%. I think a lot of the things that when it comes to writers, especially their first stories, so like your first stories being when you wrote stuff as a kid, if you did, or maybe even you didn't write much as a kid, and then when you start writing, definitely, I would definitely say a lot of my very early stories when I was like middle school. I think that was when I really started writing. Definitely would have had self-inserts, or at least inserts of what I wanted to be, or who I personally saw myself as. So very egotistical.
understandably got a lot of backlash. She was accused of being too perfect, too flawless, too good, of stealing the spotlight from the real heroes, which are all understandable complaints. But this gave rise to the second generation of Mary Sues, where some subdivision happened. See, those criticisms landed. People wanted to avoid the scorn that came with writing a Mary Sue, so service attempts were made to change these characters in ways that violated the Gen 1 complaints. This character can't be a Mary Sue. See, she's not perfect because she's actually a huge asshole. This one can't be a Mary Sue because he's the villain. This one's not an original character, they're repurposed from the original source material, so they can't possibly be a Mary Sue.
Actually, a lot of the time, villains, I feel like a lot of the time, especially the big bad evil villains, because they need to be a legitimate threat, they tend to be, as we saw with pure evil, the pure evil trope talk. I feel like villains could fit the definition. Modern pure villains fit the definition of what a Mary Sue is. But because they're villains, we don't view them as Mary Sues. Because, well, they're the bad guys. They'll lose in the end. So in a way, because they lose in the end, they're no longer a Mary Sue, right? I think I'm understanding things right.
This gave rise to the substrains of Jerk Sue, Villain Sue, and Possession Sue, respectively, all attempts to subvert the image of the Mary Sue without removing the fundamental Sue-ness. The Jerk Sue would be a colossal dickhead, but everyone they cared about would love them anyway. The Possession Sue would basically rewrite an existing character to match with what the author wanted them to be, often pulling them pretty far out of character in the process. The Villain Sue was actually pretty easy to get away with, because villains are already often over-the-top, cooler than the heroes, and crazy flamboyant, not to mention just plain fun to play. Now, there are a ton of other Gen 2 strains, but they all have one thing in common. The story still only exists to serve the image of the character, just like it did the Gen 1 Sue. No matter the skin, the Mary Sue makes the story boring around them. A story with a Sue at its core is written as though the Sue is the center of the universe. We're supposed to accept at face value that they're the most interesting, most important character in the story, because that's the starting point of their character. Not their backstory, not their motivation, just how invested we're supposed to be. And I think fundamentally that's what makes a Sue a Sue. It's not something that exists on the level of a character trait, but on the story level. It's how the plot flows around them. The error is that the author starts from the premise that this character is by default the best character. Not the most paragon, not the most powerful, but the best. The one everyone sees themselves in. Or at the very least, the one everyone wants to pay attention to. And that's the problem. When you start from that premise, you forget to write the character in a way that draws us in. When you start with the idea that of course the character is the center of attention, we, the audience, will never actually internalize why they should be the center of attention. It's writing with a blind spot, and that blind spot isn't going to be filled, and that pulls us out of the story. And
see, this is one of the things that can be fun to subvert, is by, and it's something that I'm at least trying, is that you have a character that definitely certainly comes across as the main character, especially when they're the first character POV that you get in, at least in my book. And I think in a way they could come across, especially with the first chapter, perhaps as a Mary Sue. But that, or at the very least, definitely the center of attention, or it seems like they are the center of attention. But then, hopefully, if I wrote things right, as the story unfolds, it'll become clear, and hopefully quickly comes clear, like, oh, no, they are not necessarily the center of attention. There's attention on them for reasons, but they aren't the center of it. No. Hopefully I did things right.
This is the problem that transcends fanfic and starts to enter the world of original writing. Anytime the writer is too busy squeeing over a character to establish why we should care about them, it ends up feeling a little too self-congratulatory. But the problem doesn't stop there. The Mary Sue distorts the world around them, changing the way characters act and reality works to put the focus on them. The Mary Sue is the center of attention at the expense of basically everything else. And this isn't always positive in story. The sympathetic Sue archetype is the character who the universe conspires to make miserable, just like the Gen 1 Mary Sue is the character the universe conspires to make look good. The Mary Sue in any of her forms is the center of everything, and that's not really going to be a compelling read, no matter how interesting her character.
Okay, so Red is defining a Mary Sue as someone that is the center of everything. And well, if then again, that seems like a super broad definition.
It's usually not that interesting. It takes more than a cartoonishly traumatic backstory and a laundry list of positive traits to make a character compelling. Now, to be clear, there are stories with a character at their center where the character isn't a Mary Sue. The distinction is that a Mary Sue warps the way the world works around them. Glorifying the Sue is prioritized over maintaining the established characterizations or the straight-up rules of reality. A hero might be at the center of the story, but they won't be the only important character. Luke might be the one blowing up the Death Star and saving the day, but Han's the one overcoming his personal demons and swooping in to save the kid's life at the last second, and Leia's the one sacrificing everything to get the plans to the rebellion in the first place. And we can't forget that the main drama in the story is caused by the presence of an equally fascinating villain to oppose our main trio. And that's the main false positive here. There's a difference between being the hero of a story and being the center of the universe. A Mary Sue's not a character, they're an artifact of an overly centralized story. And as a result, a Mary Sue will basically never have a good supporting cast. You can't have compelling characters and side stories in a world that's all about Mary Sue. And that's what Mary Sue is, not just the center of the...
I like this definition. I like that. Red, I 100% agree with you.
The universe, but the only real thing in the universe. Everything has to lead back to the Sue. In any situation where that's not true, you don't have a Mary Sue. You might have an overpowered character, or a character you don't like, but the Sue-ness is built on the fact that the story is sacrificed to make the character look good. A character in a good, well-rounded story where there's focus put on other characters and character interactions that don't center on them can't be a Mary Sue. The worst they can be is poorly written. And I would be remiss as an internet content creator if I didn't address the gender thing.
Yeah.
The fact of the matter is, the brand of Mary Sue is a female trope. She started as a poorly written self-insert, mostly used by beginner female fanfic writers, and blossomed into 1,000 recolored variants of a poorly written self-insert used by a wider array of fanfic writers. But Mary Sue characters are not exclusively female, and not all female heroes are Mary Sues. The thing is, there's a toxicity in the ease with which female characters can be demonized as Mary Sues for expressing protagonisty traits like being unusually skilled or saving the day. It's the same thing that happened with Gen 1 Mary Sue. People looked at the character traits the Sues were given and decided that those traits were what made made her a Mary Sue, rather than the poor writing that surrounded her. And because most fanfic authors were female, and most of their author avatars were female, this trope became a female character archetype. Traits that get a male character branded a hero are the very traits that designate a female character as a Mary Sue. People are now hypersensitive to the possibility of a character being a Sue, but only if that character fits what they think a Sue has to be, which is typically a female protagonist. Even though, as we've already established, being central to the plot isn't enough to make a character a Mary Sue, the resemblance is there, and people are quick to pile on with the accusations if they happen to dislike the character for whatever reason. But the definition being used is straight up inaccurate. It has false positives and false negatives. Not every surprisingly badass female hero is a Mary Sue, and not every dude hero is free from the Sue-ness. And this wouldn't be a problem if people weren't disproportionately ashamed of writing or enjoying reading about a character who's been branded a Mary Sue. Rather than just following the character's adventures, there's this lingering fear that the character might turn out to be a Mary Sue, making you either a hack writer or dumb for liking them. And because male characters are supremely unlikely to be called out for Sue-ness, this shame mostly roots itself in female protagonists. And the thing that makes this disproportionately bad is that an accusation of Sue-ness is a conversation ender. The character's been tainted. Their strengths and confidence are suddenly negative traits that you're not allowed to admire. And because Mary Sue is very strongly a girl-associated trope that never really sticks when applied to a male character, the accusation of Sue-ness basically only ever makes it shameful to like female characters. And it is shame. How weird is that? We've made a literary device whose very name being mentioned is capable of instantly stripping the joy out of a girl-centric story. I mean, nobody watching Dragon Ball is worried about being called out for liking Goku, except by Vegeta fans, even though he's a ludicrously powerful central character who everybody likes, who keeps pulling new abilities out of his ass and basically never loses, except when he needs to get the almost dying power-up. I mean, hell, I like Goku, but the—
Yeah, but I think the thing, though, that separates, because that's a trope within anime. I don't think necessarily, no, it's still present, I think, in new-gen anime. I think it's just a typical trope within anime where the main protagonist, everything revolves around the main protagonist, essentially. And so, I don't know if... This is the problem with the definition of Mary Sue, because it's like, by our definition here, the anime protagonists are Mary Sues, but it works for the stories that they're trying to tell. And I think ultimately that is obviously what is most important, is because they aren't necessarily sacrificing the plot of Dragon Ball for Goku. They aren't. Now, I'm not a big Dragon Ball fan. I have not watched in a long time. Never really paid too much attention of it when I watched anyway, so I don't really know much. But I can at least can go with Naruto. Naruto is a Mary Sue. Sasuke is a Mary Sue. They're both Mary Sues. They get power-ups throughout the series as they need them for the plot, so that they can keep up with the plot or whatever, or so that the plot revolves around them. But, and I think what perhaps separates them being, I guess, good Mary Sues from bad ones is that I think the intent of the author. If the author intends for these characters to be Mary Sues and for the plot to revolve around them, the author can write the plot to be around them, and it will work, right? It works for Naruto for the most part. I have lots of problems with Shippuden, but it works for the most part. Dragon Ball works for the most part, right? So as long as it, it allows the author, but if you are, say if you took my story, the story that I'm trying to tell, and I had a Mary Sue character, it would not work for the plot that I'm trying to tell, because that is not my intent. The story that I'm trying to tell would suffer from a Mary Sue, right? George R.R. Martin's story of A Song of Ice and Fire would suffer from a Mary Sue, because that's not the plot he's telling. That's not the story he wants to tell. That's not his authorial intent. I hope that makes sense. I don't know if it does. We still have 2 minutes left in the video.
The universe universe keeps finding new and exciting ways to make him even more awesome, even at the cost of logic or established reality, and that looks pretty suey by the definition most people seem to use. And that doesn't mean you shouldn't like Goku. Personally, I think the strength of his supporting cast is more than enough to save him from Soonest, and even if it weren't, it's just plain fun. But it's important to recognize that there's a disproportionate level of shame and anger directed towards female characters that have even a glimmer of Soonest about them, where a corresponding male character gets to pull off impossibly unlikely heroism with nary a sidelong glance. And that's purely because the trope was first recognized and codified in female characters. I mean, hell, if we go back 1,000 years or so and take a gander at Beowulf, we see that Mary Sues have always existed. Beowulf's character is, look at Beowulf, he's so cool, isn't it amazing how he never loses and everybody loves him? Beowulf's story is, look at Beowulf, he's so cool, isn't it great how the universe conspires to help him out right up until he has the most amazing death and burial in history? And if you like or relate to a character that the world calls a Mary Sue, don't let that stop you from liking it. Nobody else gets to dictate your tastes.
Exactly.
And there's no shame.
I fucking love Luke Skywalker. But goddamn, by this definition, no, actually no. By this definition, not a Mary Sue, I guess. From what we have discovered. Or from this definition that Red is using, and that I agree with. But if we go with that super broad definition of Mary Sue, then I still fucking love Luke. Yeah.
Shame in just enjoying something. You don't need to justify liking or disliking a character. Everyone's got their tastes. Don't force yourself to hate a character just because the world tells you you're not allowed to relate to them, or like one just because the world tells you you have to. Your tastes are your own, and you have the power to stop the conversation there. Someone else not relating to a hero you like, even someone making solid arguments for that character being a Mary Sue, doesn't mean you have to change your tastes to fit their narrative. You're allowed to have plain stupid fun. That's not to say that Mary Sue isn't a real writing problem, but the traits we commonly ascribe to Mary Sue characters are not what make them Mary Sues. A Mary Sue is just symptomatic of a specific strain of poor writing, where the author prioritizes the glorification of a specific character over the story they're actually trying to tell. But because of the
She using big words, and I am impressed.
iconic trope-codifying Mary Sue looks like a gorgeous, perfect female protagonist who does a lot of the important plot stuff, that's what people use to recognize the trope in action. And that's just inaccurate. And the corresponding levels of hate people get for writing and liking characters that fit that model discourages people from writing or reading stories with female heroes, because they run the risk of being branded with the dreaded Mary Sue label just because they look like they fit the stereotype. And don't get me wrong, don't write Mary Sues. They're boring. But maybe we should recognize that Mary Sue hasn't been a perky 15-year-old girl hero with natural highlights and color-changing eyes since 1973, and maybe it's time we updated the model a little for the modern day. So yeah.
Okay, this will be the this video went on longer than I thought it was. I thought this was, because this was just a 10-minute trope talk. I did not think I'd go talking and rambling for as long as I did. Whoops. But this was a good video. Mary Sue is definitely a very controversial topic because, again, that issue, and there is definitely a systemic sexist problem in regards to the definition of Mary Sue that needs to be overcome, need to move past, because it was 100% right. There's a very disproportionate effect on female characters when it comes, because obviously Mary is a feminine name. Hence why the term Gary Sue has also come up, has been made. But it's not used as much. Mary Sue is used a lot, and primarily it's only to dog on female protagonists, which is a shame. There are a lot of really good female protagonists that have been claimed as Mary Sues that really aren't. But yeah, hopefully, I think in time, I think it's slowly changing, where perhaps we are getting better about it. But I think that's also due in part to the changing culture, where we are starting to have more female authors getting bestsellers, publishing bestsellers and stuff. So, that's really good for the future of writing. More people getting involved, more people being published is always better. Because then that means there's more stories. Everyone has a story to tell. That's my personal belief. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more. And I will see you guys in the next video. My voice is dead after this video. I can already tell. I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.